bells are ringing and we have an election call. The election will be held on Monday, April 28th, 2025. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of the video, I want to do this. Go to the Elections Canada website, click on the Home tab, go to check or update your registration, and check if you're registered or update your address. Now, right now, the site is down because the election was just called. I assume this will be fixed by the time the video goes up, but if it's not, just check in a few hours after this video goes up. Register to vote. Make sure your registration is still good and active. If you file your taxes, it's probably already done, but again, just double check to make sure. So with that out of the way, this is the most important election for Canadian gun owners ever, and might be forever from here on out. Now, I already made a community post about this, but this needs to be said in video form as well. The greenlighting of Natalie Prevost's campaign as an MP for the Liberal Party by Mark Carney is the most mask-off thing a Liberal government has ever done with regards to gun control. She might not win. She might not win the seat. It was previously held by the Bloc, so there's a chance she could lose even if the Liberals win. But the fact that she is even running in the first place tells you everything you need to know about the Mark Carney Liberals. They are just like the Trudeau Liberals. In fact, with the acceptance of Natalie Prevost, they are worse than the Trudeau Liberals. And how is that? Well, there is literally no other reason for this woman to be in politics other than to push for gun control. That is what she has been doing almost her entire life at this point. And she's been doing it from the background. She's been consulting on the government. She has been paid by the government to do her gun control advocacy in various different ways, but she's always been in the background. She's, she might have been at the press conferences, but she's never been in the actual politics itself. It's always been from an advocacy position. The fact that she now wants to participate in the actual politics of it really shows what she's looking to do. Pair this with the announcement from a couple of weeks ago where they said they want to look at redoing the classification. The Liberals want to redo the classification system. If she is in charge of this, which I have no doubt in my mind that she would be the one in charge of all gun control, assuming she is elected and the Liberals win, it's over for Canadian gun owners. With her in charge, they will do every single possible thing they can to make gun ownership as difficult and as annoying and as really impossible as they can. Make no mistake, we are facing a possible worst-case scenario in this election. Expect every single scary-looking rifle to be banned. Expect every single semi-auto rifle and shotgun to be banned, whether they have a tube or not. Expect 5-round magazine limits for every single gun in this country. Whether it's rimfire or manual action does not matter. Expect all of that if the Liberals are elected with Prevost as an MP. And with how dire this is for Canadian gun owners, that leaves one option and one option only to vote for. I'm going to say this in as firm terms as I possibly can. If you live outside of Quebec and you vote for any other party other than the Conservative Party of Canada, you deserve to permanently lose all of your guns and be barred from gun ownership for the rest of your life. That is what is at stake. There is no reason that a gun owner should be voting for anyone other than the Conservative Party, because the gun laws they are trying to bring in are so extreme it will hit every single PAL holder. Now, the reason I said except for Quebec is because in Quebec, while the Bloc Québécois is very anti-gun, because they can never form government and they can, very importantly, block a Liberal majority government, if the race in your riding is between the Liberals and the Bloc, vote for the Bloc in order to prevent a Liberal majority government. Liberal majority governments are formed in Quebec. They're not formed anywhere else in the country. They are formed in Quebec. And you see this historically throughout the last few elections. If the Liberals had done better in Quebec, we would have had Liberal majority governments. You can vote for the Bloc if it will stop the Liberals from winning that seat, but other than that, vote Conservative. You have no other option if you're a gun owner. Now, in terms of the Conservative plan, we will have to wait and see for their full platform release, which I expect won't take too long. It's a very short election, and I think it'll probably be a week, maybe a week and a half by the time we get all of the major parties' platforms, considering everyone has known that this election has been coming for months. But we do know some stuff. Now, this is an article from January 2025 from thegunblog.ca, and it is simply saying Pierre Poilievre says Bill C-21 and C-71 will be repealed. Now, he has done this for a long time. I did a video months ago. I can't remember. It might have actually even been a year ago, where I went over a bunch of tweets and statements and articles and stuff that Pierre has said over the last year and a half, 2 years, that he will repeal these. Now, yes, it's entirely possible that he will screw us over and then completely forget about us, but I really don't think that's the case, simply because of how extreme the liberal gun control has been. He will not have a choice but to do something, because the amnesty date ends in March of 2026, or November of 2025 if it's the first gun ban. It's very confusing right now. But regardless, he has to do something, because the amnesty dates are very fast approaching. And if he gets into power, if he does nothing, he literally can't, because a few 100,000 to 1 million Canadian gun owners will be criminals overnight. So he will do something. He will have to do something. And in the manner that he does it depends, because the OICs can be undone via an OIC. He can't nullify OICs, but he can create a new OIC that undoes the old OICs. It's really stupid bureaucratic stuff, but it can be done. The more difficult thing is undoing the rifle bans, the new rifle bans that were passed in C-21, and the handgun bans. That requires a new bill. And if he doesn't get a majority government, he cannot pass those. He needs a majority government in order to pass any kind of firearm legislation. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He needs the majority government. And on election day, where are we sitting with the polling? Well, we can say that the polling is looking terrible. However, things can change very rapidly. Now, I've also made a video talking about how the election could be changed and what elections from the past that it's similar to. You can check that out. I think I'll put that one in the description. Now, since then, things have changed fairly dramatically in terms of the... I didn't think it would get to this, but the same insight holds true. The election that you should be comparing to, based on polling right now, is the 1984 election. And this one, I'm going to actually show you the polls. So, in 1984, John Turner became leader after Pierre Trudeau stepped down, and the polls immediately shot up in his favor. And as we can see, it is very similar between 1984 and 2025. Carney is elected leader. He's sworn in. The polls start shifting. Before then, they're all for the Conservatives. We saw the same thing. Obviously, there are fewer polls in 1984, but that's just because the internet wasn't a thing. But we can see the same trend lines. The election was called, the election was held, and then the debates were held, and things changed dramatically. Now, of course, there was no bloc, right? So the PCs had major movements in Quebec, and that is not something we can expect this time, right? But the same effect can happen in that the bloc is taking or splitting the Liberal vote, and so it's not, well, they might not be a caucus anymore. The bloc will still act as a preventative measure against the Liberals. And I do think this election is the most comparable because Carney is not a good speaker. Carney's French is not very good. He can speak in French in a written speech, but once he has to start going off the cuff, things start going sideways, especially a debate like this next one's going to be. It's going to be very heated, where Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, and Pierre are going to eviscerate him. They can speak French fluently in a way with high tempos and high energy that Carney just can't. And Carney is not going to look good there. Now, in the English side of the debates, Carney's speaking is still a problem in that he isn't very exciting to listen to. He's very boring, but not in a way that Stephen Harper was. We're not in that age anymore. When Stephen Harper was speaking and being his boring but effective self, the people he was running against were also not super high energy. They still had energy and they were still more energetic than Stephen Harper, but in comparison to what we have now, it's not even close. Pierre is a very high energy person, and so is Blanchet. Blanchet, while I don't necessarily agree with him, he is very funny to listen to because of just how blunt he is. And that kind of bluntness is not going to play well for Mark Carney in the debates. So the debates, I think, genuinely could be the key moment where things start to shift. Another thing to keep an eye out for is reporters. Now, Carney has really struggled with reporters in his opening few days. And I don't just mean the fact that he has attacked a couple of reporters' questions. That is pretty par for the course of politics in 2025. What I mean is that his answers, even to the ones that are layups, are very long-winded and not 100% clear. He doesn't have the charisma of Justin Trudeau. That will be a problem when a lot of people actually start to look at who he is, because right now they're not really doing that. They're looking at an idealized version of him based on his resume, not on the way he speaks. And once more people start to hear him speak and start to see his answers to questions, I think the worse it'll get for him. And so that's how we could get a swing like we got in 1984. But the main difference between 1984 and today is Donald Trump. I'm going to use this slide as an example of why a 1984 comparison, while the most accurate, is not 100% one-to-one. Now, whether Trump meant it or not, I think he meant it based on interviews that he has done. He has affected the Canadian election by stoking large amounts of anti-Americanism. In this case, the anti-Americanism is fairly justified, but the concept of anti-Americanism as part of the Canadian identity goes back all the way to the 1850s in the Durham Report. Now, you can go look up the Durham Report. It's actually a very interesting historical document, the way that he talks about Canada and everything else, but you don't need to do that. Essentially, anti-Americanism has always been a part of the Canadian identity, and it is one of, if not the most powerful force in Canadian politics. We see it in every election to some degree of, we're not like the US, we're better than the US. It's a bit of an imposter syndrome that a lot of Canadians and Canadian politicians have. And Trump has turned the anti-Americanism dial from like 4 to 50. The movement of anti-Americanism that he has stoked is so strong that it is the primary driver of why the Liberals are doing so well right now in the polls. We can see it in this graph where dealing with Trump is Mark Carney plus 6. 40% of people think Carney is best to deal with Trump. And the problem for the Conservatives is that if this election is voted on based on Trump alone, the Conservatives cannot overcome that difference. I also think it is completely moronic to think Carney is the best to deal with Trump. I mean, Trump literally wants Carney in office because he thinks he can mess with him more. But the perception from the Canadian public is generally, if a conservative government in the United States is attacking, flock to the left-wing government, regardless of who it is. It doesn't matter. Which is why we're seeing the Liberals up so high and the NDP down, because the NDP votes are running to the Liberals to stop ridiculous perception that Pierre is the same as Trump, even though he is not in any way whatsoever. But as we can also see from this poll, Pierre is up by a lot in a few key areas, including housing affordability and reducing the cost of living. Those are areas that are very important, but it depends on what the election is voted on. Because we are now in a scenario where if the election is voted on by people that are very worried about the cost of living, more about domestic policy than foreign policy, then the Conservatives have a very good chance at forming government, whether that be a minority or a majority. Very likely a minority, just because I think overcoming the Trump stuff to make domestic policy the #1 issue and pushing away all of the Trump votes, or the anti-Trump votes rather, is going to be very difficult to form a majority, but it is technically possible. So the election really just comes down to what will Canadian voters vote for. And it's really hard to say right now. This is where campaigns matter. If the Liberals run a very poor campaign on affordability, it might turn off enough people to go back to the Conservatives. And if the Conservatives run a good enough campaign, it might have enough people change over to the Conservatives. Now, another way you can look at who's going to win is based on the age voting. Now, the Liberals are doing the best among older people. And the reason that they're doing best among older people is because obviously not everyone, but a large amount of older people already have their houses that they bought for like $6,000 in the 1980s and 70s. And those people aren't feeling the same pressures that young people today are. The cost of living is hurting people that don't have anything already far more than it's hurting the people that already have a stable living condition and income. Now, I do just need to say that, of course, this is impacting over 60s. It's just impacting them in a different way that allows them to care more about Trump than the cost of living. Now, for people that are younger than 60, which is now, for the most part, made up of millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. Is Gen Alpha even old enough to vote? I actually don't know. I don't think so. But mostly millennials and Gen Z, their cost of living is the number one issue, and we can see that here with this poll, right? The Conservatives, being the party that is perceived as best for the cost of living crisis, leading over the Liberals. So this might genuinely come down to how many people vote. If more people are voting, to me, that would indicate that the cost of living crisis is the thing that people are voting on. And the reason that I say that is because the cost of living crisis is driving certain people to vote who have never really voted before. That is something that is very powerful and can be very powerful, and it's very hard to predict in polling. We will only know if that's the case come election night, when we start seeing the polls being counted and seeing how many people are actually voting in comparison to previous years. So if the turnout is high, expect a likely conservative government, but if turnout is low, expect a Liberal majority government. So that is it for this video. I'll likely have another video about the platforms and the gun control in the platforms whenever they come out. I'm going to wait for all three of the major platforms to come out, so the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives. I'm not going to do it beforehand because I think it's good to compare and contrast the different platforms, so keep an eye out for that sometime in the next few weeks. Of course, make sure your registration is up to date. Go vote and vote Conservative because you don't have a choice if you're a gun owner.